Hello, how are you? Welcome to a new class. This time, we're going to expose the application to the internet. We are going to deploy an instance of OMniLeads on a Linux server that is available in the cloud. This will allow us to make the application accessible from anywhere. For this, I'm going to deploy an instance of Linux. Lately, I have been using Debian 12 a lot. It is important to note that this instance must have a connection, let's say, to a lab network or an IP address. A NIC with a private IP address is a crucial requirement to be able to move forward. Therefore, in my example, in my provider that I am using as an example, well, here what I do is the instance indicating that I'm going to send it on a VPC. And here we have the VPC, just OML, of course. Then it will take an IP address in this range, thus fulfilling what is the requirement that is raised right here, the documentation. Then we are going to have a Linux instance. As I mentioned, I'm using a lot of Debian 12. It is a test instance. If with some 12p 4 GB of RAM we are, and soon. Moving ahead with this is going to provide us an IP address, which we will access by SSH. Once we are logged in with an instance in a terminal, there are two commands to get started. Materialize this instance where ellipse. So here, I'm going to see the IP address that this is delivering. I'm going to copy it for, as we said, access. Available. To execute two commands. Since, on the one hand, with the command that we have here, we bring from this same repository, from this same folder, we bring the first boot installer.sh script. This particular script is quite similar to what is currently being used. 1x, oversense. The core idea remains the same. It is going to provide us with an operative OMniLeads instance on the interface. On the Linux instance, we are simply executing the script. Perhaps at the time of invoking, it is a little different, since it does not propose to edit variables here inside, but we're going to pass it directly as environment variables. Those that are obligatory are two, is the interface, network of the operating system that has associated the address, private IP of which we were speaking, and the environment. The environment, if it is LAN, if it is necessary to expose the services in that IP, or it is necessary to expose it in the public IP. LAN or cloud, optionally it goes branch, that if you want to pass a specific version of this Docker compose, of this deploy. And this is assuming that the OMniLeads instance that is being deployed, not interacting with the predictive dialer, which we know is Bombat dialer, and that directly exists on an instance on a separate Linux host dedicated for them. Then, in that case, one must invoke the installation script, but extending the amount of variables to pass, since it is passed, just the host name or IP address. Where is this dictator? Where is the application of the search engine materialized? The user and password to access. User and password to access the API of the search engine, which is precisely where it interacts with the OMniLeads application. So here I was already entering to the Debian Linux instance that I just generated. And, well, as you will see, I have the installation script that I already downloaded. So let's go down the more complex path to leave this simpler. Already covered. I'm not going to pass you the branch because I'm going to let you pass the default stable branch. If I tell you that, in this case, this type of instances that have, as we said, a private IP address, one public, the Linux instance, in this case has it in the ETH. The environment is cloud. So I will edit the command that I copied from the documentation. And here I will put the address where the dialog is going to be. The user and password I leave by default. This is an example. And well, with this shot, the execution of the first boot installer. And let's see what if while happens. The installation, we look a little bit of what the script is about. We will see that what it ends up doing at one point is install Docker, download the repository of OMniLeads Deploy Manager. Stop on the folder Docker Compose and edit. Generate the environment file that we saw for the Docker desktop and start editing it. This we are going to see why. On what they are based. Why? Change. The host name that had by localhost by the private IP address also has to do with issues of exposing ports of the application and ends at a point. Deploying the scenario that implements the file. Docker Compose, prot, YAML is the one that ends up raising that. Well, for us, it is not the one that we were using. Until now, that was the default Docker field. But here we are going to see already in the next class that change. Some things like how networking works and how it's going to operate Docker for this particular stack, for this OMniLeads layout, which is manifested in this file. The rest of it is pretty similar. And it is not going to have one-where dialer because in production, we recommend that it is going to work and it's going to be installed on a separate host. And well, we are also going to find some things with the possibility of right here to configure to raise metrics from the monitoring. So, well, here we are seeing that already. Just we are in the script stage. Raise the Docker Compose stack. Starts up the Docker Compose stack, and now it is just a matter of loops here and there, waiting for the application to stop returning 302 or 502 and finally return 200. Okay? Finally, is going to run a password reset so that we can access to the IP URL that this Linux instance that we are materializing and with the user and password, admin. Every 10 seconds, it is left throwing this request, parsing the result until it makes sure that the application is up to, then run the tab recipe. It is a bash script, unlike what is 1x, 107. The bash script, installed RPM, and commands enable the boot. It consists of D of those services. Now, this is a Docker stack compose, which then the administrator can utilize to update the version of the images, rotate passwords, and there it ran. So we mentioned the IP address. In this case, we are going to control the IP address of the instance is the following one. I have here already the login with admin. Admin should log in. Let's add our instance to the firewall we configured in the security class. And I leave my instance behind the firewall according to this graphical representation to use. The deep loan tool, the script, of OMniLead handling. And I'm going to tell it to generate our relevant test scenario, the usual users to, I'll get configuring the rest, testing agents, and so on. Well, that is it for this class.